Hello all, and happy April Fool's Day. Welcome to another annual installment of Sergeant Salamander's Otaku Special. Today, we'll be covering 20 OVAs that I think are good, fun, weird, unique, or even just intriguing. I've watched and reviewed 206 anime as of this video, 100 of which I've seen in the past year alone, and original video animations have made up a substantial number of those titles. They're quick, easy, and a really solid way to settle in and watch some anime on a limited time budget. But, beyond that, they're frequently quite distinct from a lot of other anime formats. They often have a limited amount of time to grab your attention, and put their all into making something that will really stand out. There's a lot of hidden quality deep in the teeming ocean of anime, and a lot of it is locked up in OVAs that many have forgotten, or might have never even got the chance to shine in the first place. Of course, there's also a lot of stuff that's just downright bizarre, and bears mentioning as a note of artistic interest. I have refrained from including a lot of the really high-profile titles that everybody knows, and instead have curated a list in no particular order of 20 OVAs. Some are great, some are okay, and some are just bizarre, but each one of them is fascinating in its own right. Now, on to the list. Read or Die is an extremely fun, distinctly unique OVA from anime's transitional period into a largely digital medium. It is also a love letter to campy 007-style spy movies, as well as a celebration of the unbound, freeing nature of anime as a medium of storytelling. It is unapologetically its own, weird, wonderful self, and it is this dimension of it that makes me love this anime quite so much. All of this is borne out and encapsulated in the story, which is where this review will begin. Its premise is striking and strange, focusing on a globe-spanning secret network of rare book hunters who also task themselves with saving the world. They have agents with special powers who work for them, and this OVA focuses on their conflict with a terroristic group of famous geniuses from history who have been cloned in order to carry out a nefarious plot against mankind. It is so in-your-face wild, but plays this premise completely straight, taking this state of affairs for granted while the story plays out. One of these agents, the bookish and disheveled Yomiko Reedman, has the power to manipulate paper at will, and finds herself in a central role throughout this conflict. In this way, it is completely unpredictable, and keeps you firmly on the edge of your seat from start to finish. It feels both classic and totally original, hitting many of the well-worn spy movie tropes while somehow preserving all of its mystery. However, due to its brevity, things can feel a little rushed, and its fascinating world feels relatively unexplored as a result. Still, even if there's only so much you can really do with 3 episodes, this OVA manages to do quite a bit, and packs in one hell of an adventure along the way. The strongest aspect of this anime, however, is the art. As I mentioned earlier, this anime is from the transitional period of the medium between hand-drawn and digital production methods, and I believe that plays out here in its unique, and at times experimental, aesthetic. The world of Read or Die is brought to life in this visually complex, detailed manner, and coupled with that distinctive early 2000s palette of muted colors and warm, unassuming highlights. The animation is also fluid, with a lavish use of frames given to moments of distinct movement, and even outside of combat. Furthermore, the fight choreography has a sense of weight, consequence, and overall lethality that many anime tend to fall short of in some capacity. This feeling of impact gives the whole title a kind of weight that is absolutely essential for a good story, especially for an anime that's quite as short as this. Though, perhaps my favorite aspect of the art is the fact that it embodies the aesthetic spirit of early 2000s anime perfectly, and expresses the lengths of that period's overall creative potential. This resonates with me on a personal level, but I feel it still bears mentioning here. The sound is wonderful and has that same characteristic flair that the rest of the anime enjoys. The soundtrack is populated by a rich orchestral score with significant tracks that stand out on their own as distinctly energetic, jazzy, and original, and it is these pieces which really capture the spirit of the anime as a whole in musical form. The sounds of life play their part as well, with the sounds of crinkling paper and splattering blood playing a significant role, making this world feel three-dimensional and lived in. The voice work is also a good fit for this anime. For reference, I actually watched a dub for this anime on DVD, and while I have heard more technically skillful English dubs, this one is still a perfect fit, and should be the preferred method for watching this OVA. This is especially true for the main character, Yomiko, as her VA is spot on from start to finish. This brings me to the characters, who are surprisingly varied, developed, and distinct, which is an impressive feat considering this anime had about an hour and a half to achieve that. These characters feel authentic and are instantly memorable from the very moment of their introduction. Of them, my favorites are easily Yomiko and Makohari. Yomiko stands out as delightfully strange, as a character that is simultaneously capable, eccentric, optimistic, and unapologetically herself, just like the OVA is as a whole. In many ways, this anime feels like a wider extrapolation on her oddball personality. Meanwhile, Makohari, beyond her role as a badass femme fatale, stands out for how her friendship with Yomiko changes and develops over time, in a way changing her as well. Overall, Read or Die is a wonderful early 2000s anime OVA, which is for sure more obscure than it should be, but perhaps that's a good thing, adding to this sense of it as its own unique thing, outside of the mainstream, like nearly all anime was in the West during the time of its initial release. It is an artistically impressive, high-production OVA that is easy for me to recommend to just about anyone. If you're looking for a real gem that's a little off the beaten path, Read or Die is the perfect fit. Blue Submarine No. 6 is one of the archetypal gems of the Toonami era. The atmosphere, sound design, and plot truly embody the essence of that time, heavy with a sense of discovery that only a limitless medium like anime can fully realize. Even beyond that association, this show stands on its own as something forlorn, complicated, and artful, while not losing any of the kinetic action which also defines a huge part of its identity. Beginning with the story, the viewer is met with a post-apocalyptic world, inundated by an ocean full of sentient hybrid monsters, the work of a mad scientist, which the rest of the world now coordinates against. The story retains the original flavor of the 1967 manga it was adapted from, right down to the premise, including mechs and, of course, mad scientists. However, it also synthesizes deeper philosophical and conceptual influences from the late 90s in such a way that it can be counted as something completely distinct. It is this balance which makes the story so refreshing, even decades removed from its initial release. The pacing is phenomenal for such a short run, and the dialogue is masterfully written, invoking the full weight of people facing the very end of the world. However, for all its strengths, it's not quite perfect. The message of the tale gets muddled towards the end, and though it might be understandable given the runtime, it still feels as though they didn't know exactly how to end it. It seems to wrestle with itself even though such wrestling is ultimately unnecessary. The overall message of Zorndike's twisted idealism being evil on the face of it is ultimately true. To conclude otherwise is to dig a little too deep, while being simultaneously, perhaps, pretentious and shallow. The major flaw is that, even if the story doesn't really conclude any of this, it allows enough ambiguity for such weird arguments to gain a foothold. This is still the case, even when the hybrid creations of Zorndike are occasionally sympathetic, specifically with regards to Mutio. Though, even with that fact in mind, it was still cruel of Zorndike to thrust them into a world of constant war. It is clear they love him, yet he treats them as little more than tools, despite what he says to the contrary. Speaking of things which aren't quite perfect, I now must speak on the art, this anime's strongest aspect. This claim might seem contradictory, but it isn't. The art direction as a whole is bold and unique, and all of the traditional animation is crisp, warm, and smoother than many anime of the modern day. Everything from the cinematography to the fight choreography leaves a lasting impression, in a way which few shows of any era manage to accomplish in any kind of enduring fashion. Now, it's plain to see that the CG isn't very good at all. It doesn't hold up, and I doubt it impressed on anything other than a technical level back in 1998 either. However, I still don't think it detracted from the show, and here's why. It was brave and well placed at the same time. To include such heavy use of CG made them trailblazers, and to put so much of it underwater, where smooth lines and flat curved edges look more natural, made them prudent innovators. While at first it felt kind of galling, I quickly got used to it, and it only served to highlight just how gorgeous the rest of the animation really is. Meanwhile, the sound design's crowning jewel is this jazzy, smooth composition, reminiscent of Cowboy Bebop and Trigun, fitting right in with the auditory landscape which defined that golden age of Toonami, which so many of us are so familiar with. It's complex, contemplative, and alive with a sensitivity to any given scene and its context. On a dime, it can turn from this dreamy, acoustic track to a gripping score which shudders with panic and dread at a mile a minute. The rest of the sound is also excellent, with fully realized sounds of life and one of the best dubs I've ever heard. The emotion in their voices bleed through the speakers, feeling immersive and arresting throughout. However, special attention must be paid to the sound of breath. The way Blue Submarine No. 6 utilizes the sound of breath is utterly unique. It sounds as though the voice actors are actually being hit or cut or surprised and on and on. It is raw and vivid, and adds so much to the voice acting that I didn't know it could. It's a small thing, but it adds yet another piece to the monumental achievement of this show's overall sound design. The characters are also quite strong, feeling warm and human in a lot of ways which are hard to achieve in such a short time, even managing to do so with those who aren't strictly human to begin with. The ways these characters interact is both excitingly grand and unmistakably desperate. Real, three-dimensional human relationships, poignant with pain and conflict abound. Of them, my favorite characters are the long-suffering badass and secretly idealistic Hayami, and the despicable genius Zorndike, with the blood of billions on his hands. I like Hayami because he feels like a great fit for the world in which he finds himself, with a monumental grit that doesn't just amount to instant plot armor. Meanwhile, for as much as I hate Zorndike, it cannot be denied that he is a multifaceted, compelling villain. It goes to show that no matter how eloquent or well-meaning someone is, they can still be horribly, monstrously wrong. Overall, Blue Submarine No. 6 is an excellent anime, not only archetypal of the era in which it was produced, but also enduringly compelling and, at the end of the day, cool as hell. Definite recommend. Hurricane Polymar Holy Blood is one hell of a reboot. It takes an old tokusatsu kid show from the 70s and refashions it into a thoroughly badass slugfest, complete with an overhauled aesthetic and some of the best fight choreography that I've seen in anime at the time of this writing. Beginning with the story, we follow the tale of the hero Polymar, who fights the evil aquatic Plutos who want to sink the continents below the waves, all while he maintains a double life as an assistant at a second-rate detective agency in a crumbling building. My favorite part is how it takes the original core of the story while making it something more. It preserves the setup for the most part, even maintaining the general look and feel of the suits and uniforms, but brings it all to life with tension, suspense, and actual stakes. In short, the story is much like the original, only revamped as though it has been matured by time into something explicitly adult, with all the detail, violence, and rich character that entails. There are a couple of moments where the transitions feel somewhat jarring, and character motivations sometimes fall by the wayside for the sake of maintaining the show's narrative pacing. But given they only had 2 episodes to work with, I still feel like things were handled as well as they could have been. The art is what really shines, however, and is easily the strongest aspect of this anime, hands down. Everything about the art really stands out from the crowd, especially for the time, but there are 2 aspects in particular that I believe really set it apart. First, the art direction. The art direction is defined by this utterly unique aesthetic, almost reminiscent of pop art, with flashy blocks of color, creative framing, and incredibly dramatic use of lighting. It deftly creates this high-energy comic book kind of feel, which elevates everything this anime has to offer visually. This brings me to point number 2, the fights. The fight choreography for Hurricane Polymar Holy Blood is simply inspired, and once again, some of the best I've ever seen. The pace of combat is quick and hard-hitting, but at the same time, none of it is lost in the blur of battle. Every broken bone, every landed punch, and every drop of blood is animated in painstaking, positively brutal detail. It's clear they took a great deal of inspiration from actual martial arts because the way Polymar fights feels groundedly realistic, while also awe-inspiring, managing to clearly delineate what is this man's natural ability and what enhancements the suit provides. Furthermore, the way every character moves through their vibrant, detailed world strikes a balance between style and realism, which reveals the fact that the people behind this anime have a deep and intricate understanding of the human body, how it moves, and how to capture that in animation. Simply incredible. The art for this anime truly is a masterpiece. The sound is also quite strong, with excellent powerful voice work and a soundtrack that fits the mood no matter what, be it for a high-octane fight sequence or a casual, funny moment with friends. The sounds of life are also especially notable in this regard, giving the world of this anime some real sensory depth. The characters are well written and fit well into the story they find themselves in, emulating the original characters they're based on, while still managing to bring some maverick flair to the table, in a way which is neither gratuitous nor jarring. Of them, while it's hard to choose, my favorites are our protagonist, the Polymar himself, Takeshi, and his overbearing firecracker of a landlady, Teru. Takeshi feels like the perfect candidate for this kind of show, exhibiting heroism and bravery while having character depth that makes him more than just a cardboard cutout with superpowers. Meanwhile, Teru, despite being more of a supporting character, manages to be quite funny and well-written despite that, exhibiting a real personality beyond just being a potential love interest and a driver of secondary conflict. Overall, Hurricane Polymar Holy Blood is cool as hell, and a technical masterpiece. While it doesn't set any records for storytelling, it is still one of the best action OVAs out there, and as far as I'm concerned, this OVA should be the definitive legacy of Polymar for just how damn good it is. Phantom Quest Corp is a wild, funny OVA that manages to pack one hell of a punch in just 4 episodes. Richly animated, cleverly written, and wreathed in a world of magic and monsters in the heart of Tokyo, I'd say that Phantom Quest Corp is one of the quintessential 90s anime, even if it feels more like a high-production 80s anime. Then, to add to all of this, it is surrounded by weird random facts and quirks, like how the woman who sings the intro theme and voices the main character, Rika Matsumoto, would go on to be the VA for Ash Ketchum, or how according to the special extra episode File 00, they got the actual, real-life 49th priest of Enkozen Temple, Mudo Oda, to do some kind of voice work on the OVA as well. Beginning with the story, it's a simple yet effective formula that is highly episodic in its execution, each episode being its own self-contained story regarding the supernatural, which works really well with the pacing and tone of the show. I enjoy how various tropes are covered from both the Western and Eastern traditions, coupled with unique and imaginative spins on how these encounters with the beyond would look like in the bustling metropolitan life of mid-90s Japan. All in all, the relatively simple story formula is perfect for this title, and embodies its most essential characteristic: fun. The whole anime feels very fun, like a night out on the town, even with the crazy stakes and the bizarre, esoteric encounters. However, in the case of this anime, the story is really just a backdrop to its strongest aspect: the art. The art for this anime is positively magnificent, representing the zenith of 90s anime in its latest and most developed incarnation. It is aligned with itself and its themes in every way, from the vibrant, saturated color palette to the painstakingly detailed backgrounds and the brilliant character designs. The art provides Phantom Quest Corp its own unique identity. Even the animation quality, with the seamless composition of fight scenes, and even the way characters interact with the everyday world, never fails to impress. It captures the warm, living essence of the style which defined that era of anime. And even on this merit alone, I'm shocked more people haven't heard of it. It is an aesthetic powerhouse, eye candy from start to finish. Even the architectural design applied to various interiors like their headquarters, the tea house, and the hospital all bear a level of detail and aesthetic harmony that most people would simply overlook and probably do. Yet this anime has still gone the extra mile, and fulfilled its vision down to the last detail. The sound is also good, with strong, characteristic voice work and an OST which oscillates between smooth 90s jazz and frenetic city pop. The characters are similarly strong, with a fun dynamic and chemistry within the cast that further lends the show this sense of general high-spirited well-being. Of the cast, my favorite characters have to be Ayaka Kisaragi and Kozu Kurina. Ayaka is this unique blend of Buffy and Scully, with this streak of sardonic humor and persistent bad habits, paired with a passion for justice and a badass lipstick lightsaber. Meanwhile, Kozu plays the role of disheveled yet tireless cop perfectly, and contrasts well to the fiery temperament of the protagonist, especially in matters of comedy. Overall, Phantom Quest Corp is a real hidden gem, and one which anybody would enjoy, especially if you're particularly into 90s anime or 90s paranormal media, because this is where that particular Venn diagram overlaps. I have been a huge fan of anime for pretty much as long as I've known of its existence. I love the stories, I love the music, I love the range of aesthetics, I love it all. However, if I had to choose one thing that's my favorite single aspect of the medium, it would have to be the potential for hidden gems. Unlike with most other forms of art and entertainment, not everything great is going to be recognized, and as a result, you have an innumerable amount of hidden gems to discover. Anime is home to treasures hiding around every corner, and Tenamonya Voyagers is nothing if not the archetypal hidden gem. Indeed, it has slipped into near total obscurity since its release back in 1999. Despite this, I strongly feel that if it had gotten a full release, this anime could have contended with the big 90s sci-fi space adventure greats, up there with the classics like Cowboy Bebop and Outlaw Star. It is fun, it is creative, and above all, it is extremely beautiful, embodying all the best parts of 90s animation. Beginning with the story, it's got a simple setup that has basically unlimited potential, and could have kept going for 100 episodes without losing even a bit of its flavor. 3 wayward souls stuck in space are all trying desperately to get to Earth, no matter what it takes, facing a litany of challenges and misadventures along the way. When paired with the unique, eminently passionate world building, this showcases an excellent example of balancing creative vision, comedy, and suspension of disbelief all at once. However, there is a major flaw. Through no fault of its own, this OVA is only 4 episodes, and ends without a real ending. The adventure stops basically somewhere at the end of the second act, probably because the creative team got axed for budget reasons, if I had to guess. A tragedy, by all accounts, but one I can understand regardless, especially when considering this anime's strongest aspect, the art. The art for Tenamonya Voyagers really is some of the strongest I've ever seen from an anime, period. It is painstakingly detailed, colorful, and alive, with not a single corner cut anywhere in its visual production. The animation is smooth as butter, feeling absolutely seamless and liquid throughout, moving effortlessly from one scene to the next and conveying a weighty sense of physicality in even the most inconsequential of moments. It simply cannot be overstated how incredible Tenamonya Voyagers looks, from the characters to the backgrounds to the debris blowing around in the street. There's no option left other than to describe the art as visionary, and a credit to the medium as a whole. The rest of the anime is also impressive, but nothing quite measures up to the level that it reaches with its art. The sound, for example, is quite good, with a variable and professional OST that captures a wide range of emotions, and the sounds of life wreath this anime in a sense of dimensionality that makes the world feel consequential and lived in. The characters are fantastic, and our main trio of Ayako, Wakana, and Porila are the perfect group of hapless castaways, playing off each other's deeply contrasting personalities in ways which are both entertaining and, to a certain degree, believable. Overall, Tenamonya Voyagers is a woefully unfinished masterpiece, that gets a great and not quite perfect score only by right of it ending without an ending. I still strongly recommend this, as it deserves far more recognition than it gets, and it is a crime that it has languished in obscurity at all, let alone for the decades it has. Mighty Space Miners is a gorgeous little mid-90s OVA, held back in a few areas, but most of all by the fact that, somewhat bafflingly, it languishes as an unfinished story to this day. It obviously wasn't a low-budget project, and the amount of effort which went into some of these scenes is commendable. So why, then, was it cancelled after 2 episodes, story left hanging essentially in the very middle? This brings me to the anime's most problematic aspect, the story. While the story concept itself is engaging, providing a good base from which to tell a strong story, it is in this area that the anime loses the most points. The pacing is rushed, motivations aren't immediately clear, characters are barely introduced, and of course, it just sort of ends, with no clear conclusion, resolution, or even cliffhanger. It's not really all that clear to me why this is the case, but either way, it's what we're left with, as chances are not very good that this story is ever going to get finished, though it'd be nice to be proven wrong. I feel like all the serious problems with the story could have been solved by more episodes, and I can imagine a version of this anime that's 3, 4, or even 5 episodes that sorts itself out and ranks much higher in my list. The art, however, bears none of the scars of rushed production, and is the strongest aspect of this anime by far. It is absolutely stunning, with intricately detailed machines, fluid animation, rich shot composition, and indulgent use of color throughout. There really isn't that much more to say other than it does everything right, especially for its time period. One particular aspect I must reiterate before I move on is the show's intricate understanding of motion, and how to manifest that in animation. It is a genuinely impressive feat. The sound is good, meeting all basic standards of quality for the time. The characters also meet all basic standards of quality as perfectly suited for the story they're in, despite coming off a little flat. Of them, I'd say my favorites are Ushikawa, the hard-headed protagonist, and Chief Endo, the venerable old lady who commands the respect of everybody on the Totatis 1B9-6, the space station upon which the story unfolds. Overall, Mighty Space Miners is an exciting, well-animated OVA, and it would have been a true hidden gem had it not fallen victim to production shortfalls, getting cut brutally short before it could realize its true potential. Give it a watch, but be warned, there's no closure to be had with this story. You have to be able to enjoy it for what it is, because, after all, that's all you can really do. Ninja Cadets is an obscure, passionate, action-packed 90s OVA that I believe punches far above its weight. Beginning with the story, it's a pretty simple setup, with a group of young aspiring ninja students looking to infiltrate the castle which was once the base of operations for their clan, and retrieve magic scrolls from its possession, all while they're pursued by a band of evildoers. The story has strong bones, and provides the perfect structure within which all the action can unfold. It does a great job of investing you in the world and its characters, and therefore the story, pretty much right away. The strongest aspect of Ninja Cadets, however, is the art. Not only is it a perfect example of 90s anime, it is a perfect example of 90s anime that's done really well. The backgrounds are colorful and provide a sense of depth, the character designs are visually intriguing and aesthetic, the animation is fluid and dovetails nicely with the fight choreography, which itself is downright badass. I love the way everything looks in this art style, but especially the fights, specifically when there's a monster involved. The monster designs are otherworldly and capture this mystic sense of being, either through a sense of scale or unfamiliarity. They're not just reskins of common monster tropes, but rather unique imaginings, to the point where when you see one for the first time, it's not instantly clear what exactly you're looking at until it dawns on you, which makes their reveal all the more enthralling. Ninja Cadets has some of the best monster designs I've seen in anime, and to be honest, that really is an unexpected strength. The sound is a close second, with an awesome OST consisting of high-energy 90s electronic music that somehow doesn't feel out of place in this anime. It slowly builds tension with the gradual addition of new elements throughout a given scene, and before you know it, the scene is backed by a complex and riveting musical accompaniment, elevating the action to the next level. Furthermore, the sounds of life are rich and abundant, be it the quiet sloshing of water, the creaking of floorboards, or the metallic crashing of blade against blade. The characters are also quite good, being themselves quite engaging despite the severely limited time the viewer has to get to know them. They interact in ways which feel realistic, despite their powers or skills, with distinct personalities that contrast against each other very well. Of them, my favorites are Matsuri and Pochi. Matsuri for the persistent comedy she adds to various scenes through her stubborn, competitive nature, while still being a competent and valuable member of the group, and Pochi for his honest, heroic nature, interesting character design, and especially his actions in episode 2, which are extremely cool and thoroughly badass, though impossible to expand on without spoiling it. An honorable mention goes to Jame, the tall, spindly, evil witch with wild hair who leads the nefarious villains of this OVA, boasting a striking character design and cool, collected Machiavellianism that makes her feel truly sinister. Overall, Ninja Cadets exceeded every expectation I had for it, and the only problem I really have with it is that there isn't more of it. If this OVA were even 4 or 5 episodes instead of 2, it would have easily gained an even higher score from me. Regardless, I still absolutely recommend this gorgeous Maverick title. While it feels a little generous to call Double J an anime, it's still a pretty good time, and succeeds in being the kind of comedy it set out to be. Beginning with the story, there really isn't much of one. A traditional arts club gets up to a variety of antics, providing casual examples of traditional arts, wreathed in frantic, upbeat comedy. As for the art, while it makes for an admirable display of multimedia experimentation, it feels more like an old-school Flash animation than anything else. Like I said, it would be generous to call this an anime due to the general lack of any serious animation going on. Though, I don't really hold this against Double J, as it pulls off a very funny, lighthearted experience even with this rather primitive technique. To take this point even further, the Flash-style animation gives the whole show a warm, nostalgic sense of well-being. One major exception to everything I just said, however, is the ending animation. As the credits roll, the viewer is treated to a gorgeous, energetic explosion of color and animation, which is a real joy to watch in every episode. Most anime don't have anything even half as good as this for their ending, which makes it all the more bizarre that I found it in this little sketch comedy anime from 2011. The sound is probably this anime's strongest point, due to some odd factors like comedic timing and emotive voice acting. I'm not sure what it is, but the lines were delivered really well in some understated way that made all the jokes really stick the landing. Another credit to the sound is the song they used for the ending, which is endlessly catchy and captures the spirit of Double J quite nicely. The characters come off a little flat, even with the fun VA work, but this isn't a huge issue either, as there are less characters and more placeholders upon which situational comedy is often inflicted. Overall, this was a fun little romp, and there are definitely worse ways to kill time than giving the show a shot. Alien 9 is one of those hidden gems you find every now and then with anime. It just barely catches your eye, so you pick it up, dust it off, and find an incredible piece of work that has, somehow, against all odds, remained in relative obscurity, languishing with a mediocre reception. I stumbled upon it by total accident as I was looking for a quick watch, and armed with nothing but a brief description, I settled in for what I thought was going to be a fun, yet average experience. I could not have been more wrong. Instead, I got Madoka before Madoka. I got a lovingly crafted fever dream about aliens, puberty, and the terrors of growing up. I got Alien 9. Beginning with the story, which is its strongest aspect, it must first be understood as a wild thing that evades intellectual understanding and rational capture at every turn, all while not slipping into the realm of the totally absurd. Building from a premise which is simple enough, where a group of late elementary school girls are tasked with defending their school from regular attacks by monstrous aliens, it builds into something so much more than that. It tackles the psychological burden of growing up and navigating life as it changes around and within you, regardless of how you feel about it. People look at you differently, you look at yourself differently, and the whole world becomes complicated. And while you understand more of it and develop a real identity for the first time, the less of it seems to make sense, and that fragile sense of self is challenged by difficulties you must overcome. But it's also beautiful in its own bizarre way, as the worries and uncertainties of childhood evolve into a resolve to be who you want to be. I'd say the tentpole of the story is this, that coming-of-age dynamic. But it covers a lot more ground within and around that concept. Loneliness, depression, anxiety, friendship, social expectations, personal discovery, psychological trauma, defiant adaptation, and so much more. I could go on for hours, really. Its depiction of how scary and uncertain the transition into adolescence can be is uniquely raw and authentic, while its cautious moments of peace and togetherness are simple yet warm and infinitely meaningful. I've seen this piece compared to Madoka Magica, which would come a decade later, and the resemblance is definitely there. A lot of despair inflicted on young girls who are chosen to battle horrible monsters, pushed along by sinister forces beyond their understanding, embodying a subversion of the magical girl genre. However, there is a distinct difference that I believe makes Alien 9 decidedly superior. It feels so much more authentic. Madoka Magica is good, don't get me wrong, but the sheer depths of its edgy darkness feel almost manufactured, like the rules of that world are engineered for maximum grimness, and leaves many of its other themes underexamined. Meanwhile, Alien 9 covers so much emotional and conceptual ground in the space of only a handful of episodes, and in a few words or passing scenes, manages to deeply fathom all of its major questions and ideas, leaving a distinct mark upon the viewer. It grabs you and does not let go. Emotions leap through the screen directly into your chest, feeling a direct connection to the joys, anxieties, victories, and fears which unfold before you. More mechanically, the story's episodes feel like just the right length, with a somewhat disjointed pacing that lends itself well to the cerebral aspect of the show. Though, it does leave a lot of things open, and makes one wonder if that was on purpose or just a necessary exclusion to get the anime done on time. Next, the art is wonderful, combining a cute, emotive style, characterized by the distinctive inclusion of large ears and eyes, with painstakingly detailed backgrounds and alien designs that feel haunting and otherworldly. Its use of color, poses, shot composition, and smooth animation all make the art style and execution feel distinctly timeless. It cannot be understated just how great this looks for an OVA from 2001. In a phrase, it's easy to sit back and get lost in for a while. In a similar vein, the sound design is masterfully experimental. The voice work is immaculate, with voice acting that makes the characters feel more like actual people instead of just pawns for the designs of the author. They feel seriously authentic, and that is backed up with weeping that feels so genuine that it's actually arresting. Definitely some of the realest crying in anime. The sound design goes on to impress with sounds of life that carry physicality and weight, with the meaty thwack of alien biology under a swift blow, or the gentle shuffle of nervous footsteps. Though all of this auditory excellence pales in comparison with the OST. The music is bold and unlike anything else in the genre, forging ahead with a wanton experimentality, fusing cutesy slice-of-life tunes with the gripping mechanical edge of a psychological sci-fi thriller. It is a feat all on its own, distorting the perception of a given scene through a myriad of emotional dimensions, complementing and subverting at a whim. The characters are also incredibly strong, representing the main drivers of the anime as a whole, where the story is determined by their actions rather than by the whims of the plot. Their interplay is easy to get invested in, and nobody in the main cast is left wanting for depth or characterization. Beyond an engaging visual design, they are shockingly multifaceted, and are somehow able to embody this three-dimensional complexity over the course of a brief OVA. My favorite characters are Yuri Otani and Kumi Kawamura. Otani feels like one of the most authentic adolescent protagonists in anime, and since the viewer is often inside of her head with her thoughts, we get a front-row seat to the complex cacophony of debilitating anxiety and a desire to rise above it. She's not some special hero, nor a secret savant. She's just a girl who's doing her best in the face of it all. Of all the things in this anime which defy logic and convention, she remains distinctly, almost defiantly, grounded. That is refreshing in a way that's hard to describe, and a surefire formula for a good character. Meanwhile, Kawamura is such a strong character for what her presence says about the story itself. She doesn't get as much characterization as Otani, but by the subtext of her actions and brief interactions with people outside school, we get a rich portrait of her anyway. Really, that's a testament to how this anime tells its story and handles its characters. Overall, Alien 9 is a work of art that is criminally underappreciated, but still leaves so many things unsaid. With so many open questions fluttering in the breeze, it may fail to satisfy some people. But if you can appreciate it for what it is, you will walk away with an anime that you can not only feel smug about liking, but also acknowledge as something special. A rare but brief moment that punches far above its weight. This was a weird experience. While I'm an absolute sucker for early 2000s anime, especially ones which are steeped in and self-aware of otaku culture, I have to preface it with this. It is very easy to lose sight of what this anime really is, given all the in-your-face, wild energy it overwhelms you with right off the bat. No pun intended. What it really is, at its core, is a bizarre creature of the 2000s, a kind of quick-witted, acerbic parody of what the magical girl genre was at the time. Bludgeoning Angel Dokuro-chan is the absolute form of absurdist comedy, the very concept boiled down to its distilled essence, discarding of any barriers to its multitude of oddities like plot or pacing. The story is essentially just an excuse for the chaos unfolding on screen, and, unfettered by typical story conventions, delivers the essence of its parody directly to the viewer. Furthermore, for lack of how else to categorize the coming descriptions, the story is the strongest aspect of the anime as well. The premise is simple, yet anything but. An angel has come back in time from the future to protect the main character from other future girls, which would seek to kill him for his future research into what can only be termed lowification technology. Though, this angel, which is supposedly on his side, has a habit of murdering him in a variety of ultra-violent ways, only to resurrect him immediately after her various outbursts. The execution is decidedly episodic, though there is some carryover from episode to episode. This gives the anime a frantic, high-energy vibe that one would expect from a short comedy series like this one. But it is the comedy itself that makes the story shine. It is absurd, with comedic timing, physical comedy, and situational conditions which are so utterly unique to this show in particular that they are a transcendent example of the genre done right. Animation and expectations are simultaneously subverted in order to keep the viewer constantly on the edge of their seat, bracing for the next insane development. The use of real photographs, timing and delivery of jokes, over-the-top situations, and a flagrant disregard for suspension of disbelief make for some of the funniest moments in anime, period. Unfortunately, they are moments, and remain moments, instead of linking together into a more cohesive whole. They are separated from each other by lakes of bog-standard formulaic slapstick or uninspired ecchi tropes. These things aren't bad when they're executed well, but the show is constantly trying to make you laugh, and in the moments where it fails, it's really noticeable. Regardless, the math still comes out positive for the story, as the unbounded, experimental nature of the comedy pays off in a big way when it does pay off. The art is quite good, certainly better than the industry standard at the time, with character designs and gag moments of such detail and complexity that they really catch you off guard, adding to the comedic element. Though, I feel they put so much into the scenes of Sakura getting absolutely eviscerated that other scenes where there's nothing batshit going on feel bland, and almost rushed by comparison. My favorite part of the arc by a mile is the use of real photographs for comedic effect, but especially the inclusion of the random white guy in the sequel OVA. The sound is good, with unsettlingly visceral attention paid to details like Sakura's bones shattering to bits, or his brains washing down the drain. The soundtrack backs all of this up, amounting to an acid trip nightmare dreamscape version of your average mid-2000s slice of life OST. The characters are perfect for the world they inhabit, which is to say they are either victims of, or avatars for, the director's fundamentally insane and brutally comedic will. Overall, Bludgeoning Angel Dokuro-chan is a random and unhinged absurdist comedy which has the seeds of greatness scattered throughout, but just misses the mark one too many times to truly earn that title. Give it a shot if you want a real trip. If it's weird anime you're into, I guarantee you it'll be the ride of a lifetime. Shamanic Princess starts out so normal. It opens as a beautiful 90s OVA with a fun story and cool MacGuffin, but becomes a psychedelic exploration of complex philosophical concepts with brutal metaphysical violence, and even straying into the realm of body horror. When I sat down to watch this OVA, there was no telling what it would become, and that unpredictability is part of what makes this anime so unique. Beginning with the story, it is very solid, and as I said, it unfolds in a very unusual way. This is in terms of both the story itself and the format in which the episodes are ordered, with the last two taking place chronologically before the first episode. Without spoiling anything, the storyline becomes very complex and decidedly trippy, exploring heady and unsettling themes you wouldn't necessarily expect from a magical girl anime, even one more aimed towards an adult audience, as this one is. These themes include the nature of existence, fate, duty, and identity, and I even picked up on an implicit exploration of Gnostic philosophy, with the anime's major focus on mysterious, amoral, and often arbitrary metaphysical forces that impact their lives and how they live them, embodied with particular intensity in the main villain. These themes are great and really give you something to chew on, but due to the brevity of the OVA, they can get somewhat confused in their own analysis. The other aspects of the story are strong, but also suffer from some pacing issues, like the fascinating yet underexplored world building and the confusing, somewhat anticlimactic ending. Despite all this, the story is bold and intriguing, and deserves praise for even attempting to cover such complicated concepts in only 6 episodes. Even if you don't engage with the heavy ideas on display, it's still cool as hell to look at and go through as a unique aesthetic experience, which brings me to this anime's strongest aspect, the art. The art for Shamanic Princess is incredibly strong from the very start, and only gets better from there. The character designs are striking and memorable, with a lithe sleekness to them that conveys a kind of effortless elegance. The backgrounds are rich and complicated, filled with detail in every scene. The animation is incredibly smooth, imparting a lifelike quality to both scenes of action and scenes of mundanity. Altogether, however, and especially for the latter half of the show, the art summons this otherworldly essence that simultaneously amazes and unsettles depending on the scene. It is totally original to itself, and not afraid to lavishly execute its creative vision in ways that seem haunting or bizarre. It is for this aesthetic ambition that the art is the backbone of Shamanic Princess, and what ultimately sets it apart as something special amongst the veritable ocean of 90s OVAs. The sound is quite good, with a rich, emotional dub, and a soundtrack that fills every scene with an exciting, crackling atmosphere, tense with action or an odd foreboding. The characters are quite strong, playing their roles well in a story that moves them from interesting place to interesting place. While they're not written in such a groundbreaking manner, they are still written well, and it's how they act in the situations they're put in that is distinctly engaging. Of them, my favorites are Tiara as a fun and interesting main heroine that isn't a Mary Sue, and the main villain they encounter towards the climax of the OVA, who I will not name here. He, or I suppose it, is an incredibly strong and well-written villain, fitting into something more akin to cosmic horror than the big bad from a magical girl anime. It is a being that left an impression on me as an astoundingly sinister thing, capturing the essence of something that doesn't necessarily belong in the world it's in, which is deeply impressive. Overall, Shamanic Princess is a fantastic 90s OVA that hits you with intense themes and visuals that really come out of nowhere, striking the balance between badass action, complete with special named attacks and combat transformations, and heady experimental cosmic horror, with obscure philosophical overtones. I strongly recommend this, as whether you watch it for the combat or the concepts, there's something here for you. Pachislo Kizoku Gin is an utterly unique anime, all around unlike any of the others I've seen. It's a sports anime, but the sport is a specific type of slot machine. It's a gambling anime, but it's framed as a noble struggle. It's a story about navigating personal relationships, but the sacrifices they make to gamble are often, but not always, depicted as honorable. This is also an anime from 2001, and only got an English dub 21 years later by total chance. And watching it made me think about how many other obscure vintage anime must be out there, unloved even by their domestic audience, waiting to be fan-subbed and given a second chance at life, even if only with a handful of people. Following this thought, what struck me the most was that this odd anime is actually kind of good. At the very least, it blew my expectations out of the water because they were so low to begin with. And of course, it goes without saying that it's not especially good, but for what it is, I am regardless impressed. I was first hooked only by the fact that it had a strange premise and no score or reviews on my anime list. But once I started watching it, it wasn't an endurance test like I thought it was going to be. Beginning with the story, which is this anime's strongest point, we are presented with this bizarre plot about a high-stakes underground gambling ring called Slothium, though a later plaque says Slosium, so maybe this one is just the Japanese pronunciation and the other is how it's supposed to be spelled? I'm not sure about that aspect. Regardless, it features finely dressed attendees and expensive liquor and butlers and whatnot, but the only form of gambling taking place is Pachislot, a specific type of slot machine where the player must choose when to stop each rotating drum. The players in Slothium face off against each other in regular bouts, either competing for the biggest score or seeing who can get to a certain score threshold first. Otanashi Ginya is a reporter who is sent to report on Pachislot, and is eventually dragged into the world of Slothium, attempting to unseat the ultimate king, Daiba Ryo. The story then proceeds from there, maintaining a consistent quality while hitting all the classic sports anime/shonen tropes. There's a long-running tournament arc, a whole cast of unique enemies with their own peculiar styles and strategies for how they play Pachislot, an estranged father, and even the whole "do you choose me or the struggle" romance subplot. The story on its own is genuinely impressive, because while it is kind of formulaic, it manages to make this anime, which is essentially just about pressing buttons, legitimately engaging. Everything from the exploration of a broken family to the concealment of a secret illness, the story keeps your attention, and always brings it back around to Pachislot. I especially like how Omi is worked in as a character, becoming my favorite character by the end of it, and also how the show sticks the landing by ending the story in a satisfying way. Though, even with all this praise, it's still relative to my initial expectations. Some major problems include strange, uncharacteristically convenient character motivations, absolutely busted plot pacing, and how the whole thing kind of feels like a thinly veiled glorification of gambling addiction, even if it attempts to mitigate that at points. The way Pachislot is viewed by society in the anime is not the way it's viewed in real life, like how Spanish piano savants don't treat the game as an art form, for one glaring example. Though, even with these issues, it's still better than everything else in this anime. The art, for example, is serviceable for 2001, even perhaps a little rough around the edges. The character designs and art style are distinct and interesting, and even the CG is pretty good for the time, but the characters suffer from the dreaded mask, where facial expressions meant to convey emotion often fail to do so. and the animation is pretty janky at times. For example, I saw someone's arm pass under the animation cell of someone else's mouth. Characters sometimes snap into a standing position once finishing a motion, and the physics of the world are often jarringly inaccurate. Still, you could tell they tried their best, and that's worth something. The sound was, again, serviceable, with voice acting and sounds of life that meet the minimum standard of quality, while the opening and ending are actually pretty good, and will be stuck in my head for a while. The characters also meet the basic standard of quality required for the story to take place, and it feels more like the story imbues them with value rather than value being intrinsic to them. Overall, Pachislo Kizoku Gin is a weird anime that does the best it can with what it has and even manages to keep one's attention for a while. But even then, it is a rough, unpolished work, and while I certainly don't regret watching it, I think that if circumstances were different and other people had already rated and reviewed this anime, I probably wouldn't have bothered to give it a chance in the first place. Iria, Zeiram the animation is a bizarre case indeed. On the face of it, it seems as though this is just another 90s sci-fi action OVA, and in many ways it is. But upon closer inspection, it manages to set itself apart in a variety of interesting and bizarre ways. For example, this anime is actually a prequel to the live-action film Zeiram from 1991. When considering this weird production trajectory, backed up by an utterly unique art style and fun, campy premise, it's clear that this anime is more than just a throwaway OVA. Beginning with the story, it's fairly simple and heavily reminiscent of the Alien franchise. Two so-called hunters and an apprentice are sent up to a ship in crisis to evacuate the crew and retrieve the cargo, only to find a horrible, seemingly invincible humanoid monster with grotesque biological abilities has escaped, which then begins to wreak havoc across the system. It runs into some problems later with character motivations, but it's not that big of a deal here. Despite being a touch predictable and perhaps heavy-handed with its alien influences, it manages to execute its formula well and remain a cool early 90s romp throughout. It really feels like something meant for popping in the VHS player, then cracking open a few beers and ordering a couple pizzas with your friends. Like, it's not necessarily good, but it is a fun time, especially under the right circumstances. Moving on to the art, it is this anime's strongest aspect. The general art direction is incredibly strong, with a real vision for a unique and fantastic world distinct all its own. It has this engaging blend of the futuristic and the traditional, combined with a style which draws heavily from Indic cultures like India, Sri Lanka, and more broadly Southeast Asia. The backgrounds are also consistently impressive, and seem to be where most of the budget went. Overall, it reminds me more of an 80s anime than a 90s anime, due in part to some of the stylistic choices they make throughout. Unfortunately, while the characters themselves have good designs and are well animated in combat scenes, they feel somewhat cheap in comparison to the rest of the show, and suffer from what I term the dreaded mask, where characters' facial expressions seem stiff and unemotional at moments where they absolutely should not be. Other than that though, the art is what really sets this anime apart. The sound is good, meeting all standards of quality for the time, and supported by an energetic and almost trippy synth track that sounds straight out of the 80s. The characters fit their setting rather well, even if they're not very deep. Among the cast, my favorites are Fujikuro and Komimasa, because in comparison to everybody else, they feel somehow the most believable. Fujikuro has this rough exterior which evolves over the course of the show to the point he really grows as a person, and as a result has actual layers to his character, whereas Komimasa acts in a fashion which befits a street urchin with a sense of honor, and his moments of dialogue almost feel like they come from a different anime altogether. He is a more believable depiction of what he is than his friend Kei, for example. Overall, Iria, Zeiram the animation is a fun 90s action romp with which you can just turn your brain off and enjoy, as long as you can ignore its flaws. The Cockpit is a rare beast of an anime. It's about World War II, doesn't cover it exclusively from the Japanese perspective, and consists of 3 self-contained vignettes. It's a strange mix of topic, genre, and format, resulting in an OVA which is conceptually strong, but still fall short in some ways which are too glaring to ignore. Beginning with the story, it is right off the bat the strongest part of the show. They are poignant tales of morality, honor, and military tragedy that manage to lay bare the conflict of these things within the human heart in artful and arresting fashion. Though, the show starts out a little weak with the first episode being this wild flight of fancy with a questionable moral calculus, instead of a grounded story about duty which could have conceivably occurred, like the other two. The art is generally good, with an astounding warmth and detail given to backgrounds and objects, which is a defining feature of anime from that period. The character designs, when they're good, are great. However, it is within the art where its greatest weakness is found, and what has cost it the most points. Namely, I absolutely hate the goofy style with which most Japanese characters are inexplicably animated in this show. It's so ugly and distracting that it's almost impossible to take those characters seriously, which is a real damn shame, because it is the latter two episodes which are the best, and that's where they show up. The worst part is that I know they could have animated them at least a little better, because the application of such a lazy style seems to be random, without regard to screen time. It's rough, because without that glaring flaw, this show would probably be much higher on my list. The sound is good, with a solid contemplative OST and competent voice work, though I recommend the dub for the first episode and the sub for the latter two, for immersion's sake. The characters are quite strong, though they're reliant on the strength of the stories they're in. They are not innately heroes, but rather they're made such by their circumstance, even if they're the villains in other people's stories. The best character by far was Ansai Nagami, whose tortured yet dedicated psyche made for an eminently engaging episode and the best of the three by far. Overall, The Cockpit is a unique, well-written clutch of war stories that manage to impress in some ways and fall short in others. If you're interested in checking out the relatively sparse genre of World War II anime, then I'd say this would be a fine introduction to it. Hyperdolls is an archetypal, over-the-top 90s comedy action OVA, complete with magical girls, giant monsters, and self-aware jabs at its own genre. While it doesn't necessarily break any new ground in regards to its general formula, it is still good old-fashioned 90s fun, something for which the best advice is just to turn your brain off and enjoy. Beginning with the story, it's a simple formulaic setup of two magical girls from outer space fighting giant monsters on planet Earth, all while they maintain their secret identity from those around them at school and society at large, with one poor bastard who knows who they are and has to keep that secret at all costs. Hijinks ensue. As for its quality, it feels kind of rushed and drops you right into the middle with little to no explanation, since it seems to be adapting from the middle of the manga's story somewhere. So, since you have no real context as to what's going on, the stakes feel kind of nebulous, but the show itself manages to deliver a good time regardless, with physical comedy and vulgar innuendo throughout. Beyond its baseline entertainment value, though, it's not really remarkable in any particular way. The art is the strongest aspect of the show, delivering on the indulgent color and high-octane action that 90s anime is often known for, making it a pleasure to watch in this regard. The sound is above average, with fun, multifaceted voice work that adds a lot of color and personality to jokes that might otherwise fall a little flat. It sounds like a project that the voice actors had a lot of fun with. The characters are also pretty good, as while they're just filling archetypes such as the aloof heroes or the neurotic male lead, they're doing so in a way that is thoroughly entertaining. Of the cast, it's hard to choose a favorite, because they measure up just about the same to each other, and each have their own drawbacks as well. The Hyperdolls Mika and Mew are the driving force of the show, bringing humor and cool fight scenes, but they're both so stubborn and dense it can get a little irritating at times. Shoko is eager and inquisitive, always so close to figuring out who the Hyperdolls are, but she is given comparatively little screen time. Hideo is our long-suffering protagonist, whose constant trials force him to adapt and are funny to watch, but his constant complaining can get old pretty quick. Then, everybody else is too secondary to even have any development in the first place. Overall, I'd say Hyperdolls is best understood as a supplement to the manga rather than its own thing as an anime, which does impact its score, but doesn't really detract from the fact that it's good, simple fun, regardless. I wouldn't go as far as to say this is a hidden gem, but it's still a hidden something. Maybe a hidden shiny penny or a hidden cool rock. Give it a watch if you like 90s tropes and have some time to kill. You could certainly do worse than this. Put simply, Strait Jacket is what would happen if Fullmetal Alchemist and Hellsing were fused into one show. It is a world where magic is studied like a science, but misused by the powers that be in service of some grand conspiracy to horrifying effect. But also a story where a jaded and irreverent loose cannon with a haunted past hunts monsters for a living, all while dragging along some poor public servant who just wanted to do her job as she becomes attached to him over time. Alternatively, it can also be described as rated R Fullmetal Alchemist. All of this is to say that it comes together to great effect, especially if you have a penchant for unapologetically edgy 2000s anime. I actually have a past with this anime that I had totally forgotten about until I stumbled upon it, beginning what I suppose could be called a rewatch. Back when I was a kid, the Sci-Fi Channel used to show a lot of mature, thematically heavy shows, and this was one of the ones I managed to catch. I distinctly remember the first demon transformation scene scaring the absolute shit out of me, but also that the show in general was simply magnetic. Beginning with the story, right off the bat, it's the strongest aspect of the anime, which is impressive considering it's only a few episodes. The world building is rock solid, with an engaging, three-dimensional concept that allows for a lot of room to improvise and grow. Then, Strait Jacket puts this intriguing world to use in service of a story which is gritty, gory, and effortlessly cool. I found myself moved by the tragedies and the trials of this world and the characters in it, rooting for their successes and feeling for their many losses as smooth, contemplative dialogue takes place in just the right amounts, at just the right times. The whole arc of the story felt controlled and well-paced, reaching its conclusion with an artful finish. Speaking of which, the art is broadly quite good, embodying that edgy 2000s vibe flawlessly. The gunmetal machines, the armored trenchcoats, the small shades, they're all there and their presence can't be missed for a moment. The backgrounds are amazing, especially the architectural and interior aesthetic of the city, making for a gorgeous built environment drawing from Western design philosophy, which contrasts starkly with the bloody gore and the horrible monsters. Furthermore, the gore, which is ubiquitous and gratuitous, is gross in a way that can be appreciated, and not gross in a way which provokes a sense of disgust. It adds to the story, especially when all the body horror monstrosities are turned into meaty chunks of flesh. The character design is very strong, with a sense of identity that marks this show out as something all its own, while still obviously being a product of the era in which it was produced, the only real visual flaw being the occasional instance of emotional stiffness from certain character expressions. More succinctly, my feedback on the character design also speaks to how I feel about the art design as a whole. It's just very satisfying. This show knows what it is, and boldly pursues that vision of itself, reaching that goal and surpassing it. The vision of Strait Jacket is one which has been translated almost effortlessly into anime. The sound is good, meeting all standards of quality with a strong soundtrack and well-made dub. The characters are strong, though some of the more peripheral individuals have a tendency towards some mild flatness. Of the characters, my favorites are Isaac Hammond and Kapeltetha. Isaac is such a strong character that one could even argue that this tragic tale is meant to be his own, viewed from the outside. At first it seems like he's going to be your bog-standard co-worker rival type character, but then he evolves and transforms into this brutal, tragic anti-hero, even putting our main character's edge to shame. Then, Kapeltetha is a unique case in that, besides being rather unusual herself, her relationship with Riot is one that's complex and interesting, adding much-needed depth to him as the two interact, contrasting with her aloof and almost analytical attitude, which itself contrasts with her physical appearance as a mysterious, yet decidedly unimposing girl that one would initially expect to be nervous or unsure of herself. Overall, Strait Jacket is severely underrated, and deserves recognition as a solid 2000s edgelord gorefest. I'm glad to see it held up after all this time, and as such, it's an easy title to recommend. Dragon Half is a creative, self-aware, raucously funny parody of 90s anime and all its stereotypes, complete with complicated fantasy setting, slimes, dragon girls, and magic. It handles itself with the exact amount of seriousness it ought to. None at all. It is archetypal of the mindless good time that many of these tiny OVAs had on offer during that era. Beginning with the story, it's a simple setup that makes sure not to get in the way of the comedy. Mink, a girl who's half-dragon, and her two friends are under attack by a fat oaf of a king and his hapless henchmen, whose ridiculous and self-absorbed plans always fall through. I'll call the story the strongest part of the anime, since the comedy is just so hilariously well written. With such a short total runtime, they make sure not to waste a moment when it comes to making you laugh, be it through physical comedy, ridiculous gags, or writing which scathingly parodies anime of the era, especially fantasy adventure stories, while still remaining eager and independent in its own right. Dragon Half, in this way, can be enjoyed both for what it is and what it's making fun of. In short, I cannot stress just how funny it is throughout. The comedy holds up fantastically well, even to this day. The art is unique and distinctive, with a fun, playful style which changes on a dime. This sometimes proves to be a boon for the prominent and well-executed physical comedy, but other times is a little jarring. Though, the character designs are great throughout, managing to be unique yet referential to the popular styles they're poking fun at. The sound is really great, with strong, characteristic voice work and a soundtrack that is wacky, energetic, catchy, and emblematic of an early 90s OVA. Copious use of synthesizer paired with creative musical direction combines to form a fun, carefree, and memorable soundtrack, adding to the generally lighthearted tone of the anime as a whole. The characters are also pretty good, save for Mink's dad, who comes off as flat and unfunny. He doesn't get much screen time, but in a show which doesn't have that much screen time to begin with, it's still suboptimal. Of the otherwise hilarious cast, my favorites are definitely Rosario and Damaramu, both for the same reason. They absolutely nail the inept henchman shtick. Rosario's constant attempts at being a mysterious mastermind, and Damaramu's regular failures to live up to his boastful warrior persona mirror each other in their hilarity, and watching just how bad they crash and burn is probably one of the best parts of the show. Overall, while it isn't perfect, Dragon Half is a blast of an OVA, and deserves to have more episodes than it does. Oh, what shall I say about Bastard? It's the kind of anime you'd furtively get from your local video rental place's anime section back when it was the weirdest thing you could be into. Bastard is the kind of anime you'd find painted on the side of a van, next to Conan the Barbarian. In short, Bastard is violent, horny, and 90s as hell, and not once does it pull back or apologize for it. It leans so heavily into the trope that it almost borders on parody, with just enough sincerity to not quite cross the line. There's blood, there's tits, and there's Dark Schneider, the bad-mouthing, overpowered badass that can never seem to just stay dead. It's also enveloped in an array of bizarre production decisions that lend the whole thing a sense of hallucinatory absurdity. For example, the intro sequence is given by an English-speaking narrator in both the sub and the dub, but the narrator for the sub positively sucks, while the narrator for the dub is legitimately professional, providing the perfect tone for the show. Furthermore, the English dub has Darren Norris as the voice of Dark Schneider, who is best known for his part as Cosmo in The Fairly OddParents, making the dub a surreal experience to say the least. But my favorite part about all of this is, ironically, how damn funny the whole thing ended up being. I have no clue if this was intentional or unintentional, but Bastard ranks among the greats for comedy. With all this in mind, I have to start somewhere, so I'll start with the story. Taking place in a dark fantasy post-apocalyptic future filled with magic and monsters, Dark Schneider is awakened by a desperate mankind to prevent evil sorcerers from awakening the god of destruction. Overall, the setup is pretty simple and fairly episodic, with Dark Schneider running into some powerful foe, making snarky quips and irreverent insults at them as the carnage ensues, peppered with nudity throughout. It's a fun, simple formula. I wouldn't say it's groundbreaking or even particularly notable, but the world building provides enough of a setting for the story to take place, however thin and unexplained, which is straightforward and avoids any confusion. The art is very strong, with intricately detailed backgrounds characteristic of the time, making the world feel tangible and alive when paired with a strong visual style that embodies all the best things that 90s dark fantasy anime had to offer. This still stands even as it is wildly inconsistent in terms of its internal theming, filled to the brim with knights, ninjas, castles, and slimes, all crowded in shoulder to shoulder within the world of Bastard. The character designs especially bolster this anime, being each in their own right distinct and strikingly memorable, with a firm grasp on the human figure, as well as inhuman figures. The one failing of the art is the occasional choppiness of the animation itself, which doesn't flow as smoothly as it should every now and then. Given this, it must be said that the majority of the time, it does indeed flow, sometimes impressively, especially when it comes to many of the earlier fight scenes. Next, the sound is the strongest aspect of the anime, not for the soaring adventurous score, not for the sounds of life which meet all standards of quality for the time, but for this anime's English dub, which I consider legendary. The dub for Bastard makes this not only one of the few anime for which I prefer the dub, but one of the even fewer for which I consider the dub essential. The comedic timing is flawless, the banter is witty, and the dialogue as delivered by Norris as the voice of Dark Schneider is snarky, original, and utterly hilarious. Put simply, I must reiterate in the strongest possible terms that the English dub of Bastard takes the whole show to the next level, and is the entire reason why I've rated it as high as I have. Without the dub, I'd say this is a unique but ultimately forgettable 90s OVA, but it has the dub, and it is impossible to forget. The characters are by and large just as developed as they need to be, no more, no less, with the strongest of them being Dark Schneider and Gaara. Dark Schneider is in the lead by a mile, because he's the anchor of the show, and it is his dub that elevates the entire anime. Even besides that, he's simply a funny, irreverent main character who lives up to his namesake, Bastard. Gaara is a pretty distant second, but still takes his spot as a notable character for his over-the-top warrior spirit and a glimmer of that same chaotic irreverence we see in our unshakable protagonist, especially in the final 2 episodes. Overall, Bastard is an over-the-top OVA with a strong sense of identity apart from other similar anime of the same era, harboring an unexpected payload of comedy gold that cements its place in anime history. Electromagnetic Girlfriend is an eccentric little gem of an anime, absolutely packed with suspense, mystery, and adventure from start to finish. I went into this with the weirdest expectations because of the title, but not even 10 minutes in, those expectations were flipped on their head, and I was hooked. Beginning with the story, it really pulls its weight considering just how short the show is with a scant 2-episode run. Without giving anything away, the setup is very out there, but soon builds itself up to this engaging, even surprising story, backed up by some great writing. The mysteries are so unique and detailed and take these turns that are just impossible to see coming. This aspect alone is incredibly impressive and is this anime's strongest point. The art is very solid overall, with distinct character designs and a level of background detail which really brings the world to life, which in turn makes the mysteries more compelling. The sound is also well crafted, with impressive voice talent and accurate sounds of life, like footsteps on wet pavement or the buzzing of flies. This is all not even to mention the music, which adds this ethereal sense of mystery and danger to any given scene. The characters that find themselves in these mysteries are also compelling, and act in ways that feel both classically styled for a mid-2000s anime, and also grounded in pretty believable motivations, especially Drew's reluctance to entertain Ame's seeming delusions, or Hikaru's desire to protect her sister. Overall, Electromagnetic Girlfriend is a solid mystery anime, especially for how short it is, and is definitely worth a watch. Indeed, my biggest count against it is that there's not more of it, as even the manga itself is pretty short. Do not sleep on this. At best, you'll love it, and at worst, there are worse ways to spend 80 minutes. Assemble Insert is a delightful little OVA from the late 80s, complete with goofy villains and a definitively endearing protagonist. Beginning with the story, it's a simple setup, with an over-the-top themed gang of bank robbers in power armor, a hapless yet passionate special police unit, and a regular girl with special powers and a heart of gold who comes to save the day. The pacing is snappy, pairing well with the general flavor of the comedy throughout, and its various elements manage to come together to make this anime a real pleasure to watch. The art is even more impressive. Not only does it capture that warmth that often characterizes older titles, it pairs it with a fun flair unique to its own style, especially in the way it handles character designs, specifically the design of the main heroine. Good character design tells you everything you need to know just by looking at them, and that definitely applies in this case. Marin's face betrays an innocent simplicity and a general silliness that makes her a main driver of comedy throughout, while not being so simple as to rob her of her individuality as a character. The whole cast is quite distinctive, though they follow more closely to various pre-established archetypes like the crazed evil scientist and beleaguered salaryman. The sound is also great, with a soundtrack that is catchy as hell, supporting lighthearted voice work and sounds of life which add some much-needed depth to various scenes. The characters constitute this anime's strongest aspect, not for any complexity or maverick writing, but instead as perfect incarnations of feelings they were trying to capture, while still allowing them to feel like more than just puppets. Marin is the best character in the show, and the best example of this principle at work, reflecting her design as an eager, sometimes foolish girl that serves as the centerpiece of the anime, and makes the comedy which surround her that much funnier by contrast. I'd say the main bad guy, who literally has the last name Demon, serves a similar purpose for the Demon Seed gang, though he doesn't get as much screen time. Overall, Assemble Insert is a fun, lighthearted quasi-parody of various genres popular at the time, including mecha, magical girl, and idol culture. This one is an easy-to-recommend feel-good romp with a nice dash of 80s flair. And that concludes our list. I hope that over the course of this journey that I've been able to bring to your attention some hidden gems, or even just some peculiar oddities that you'll have a fun time checking out. As I said at the beginning, anime as a medium means quite a bit to me, so I hope those of you who've stumbled upon this video had a good time watching it, and move on having found something of particular value that suits your tastes. Anime is a vast medium, with corners that might as well be unexplored, with nary a visitor in decades, and OVAs are the most common type of thing you'll find there. So, without the budget of movies, and without the runtime of full series, the original video animation stands on its own as a maverick, ambitious format that, while less common nowadays, still very much bears recognition in its own right. So let's pay thanks to the OVA, and enjoy whatever the future has in store for this inimitable format.